This video is brought to you by PrizePicks. One thing I love about sports is that after you do something of significant consequence, if you are a general manager, a head coach, a player, you have to answer to the media about why it is that you did the things that you did. And look, there's a lot of different places where I would love to be able to get a press conference from somebody who made a decision that seems crazy, right? But in the NFL, you do get that opportunity. And Andrew Berry spoke to the media addressing his trade of Myles Garrett. And I'm just going to start this video by saying this. I'm just going to go into this press conference before I react to anything, acknowledging that one thing is absolutely true. There was nothing Andrew Berry could have said at this press conference that would have made me happy, right? There was absolutely nothing that man was going to open his mouth and say other than, psych, we didn't actually trade Myles Garrett. That was going to make it okay that he traded Myles Garrett. You can be different levels of upset about the move. You know, I'm at the point to where I'm just going to accept it. I don't like it. I think that it's not the right move, but I'll try to embrace whatever the Browns have going on. But that doesn't mean I have to be like brainwashing to be, oh my God, what a trade, laser eye. Not going to do that. But Andrew Berry went up to the media. This is a no-win situation. There's nothing he's going to say here that makes people happy. But let's listen to how the team has framed this trade and how they are framing what they brought in with this trade, and just to try to get a perspective of what their goals are from this trade and what they hope to achieve.
Morning, everyone. So I'll be honest, I did not have this press conference on my bingo card for this spring. I know you all have heard me say for a number of years at this point that, Myles Garrett, he's a foundational player, Hall of Fame worthy, and a homegrown talent that's been here for the decades. And, our intent was to have him be a one-helmet player for his career. And that was the truth. And even to this day, when Myles's, career is over, we look forward to welcoming him back, into the organization. But there are moments, particularly in my job, where, opportunities come up that, quite honestly, are unexpected. And they force you to stop and reevaluate and look at it and say, hey, is this something that could be, really beneficial to the team? And that was the case in this instance where, it got to a certain point where we looked at, what the trade details were. And we asked ourselves, okay, do we hold here, regardless of, how, because of how emotionally right it felt, or do we ultimately make a decision that we think has a huge benefit, to the team in both the short, and long term.
All right, so that is the framing of this trade. So let's remember this, right? Because this is going to be important when we evaluate this move 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, right? This wasn't a trade that Andrew Berry is saying that they made out of a panic. It's not a trade that they felt like they had to make as far as like the circumstances, as far as Myles wanting to play. It's a trade that they wanted to make because they felt like the deal was so good that they could not pass it up. That might not feel important right now because right now we're not worried about evaluating the trade. It's too early to truly evaluate the trade. Right now, it just matters that, hey, did you want Myles on the roster or did you not, right? And if you wanted Myles on the roster, none of this is going to make that okay. But when it comes to us evaluating this, right, part of the reason Andrew Berry doesn't really get that much flack about any of the Deshaun Watson stuff is largely seen that that's not something that Andrew Berry drove the bus on. This does sound like something that Andrew Berry drove the bus on. This does sound like Andrew Berry saw value here that he did not feel like he could pass up. And regardless of what we're going to come up in our own headcanons about how the Browns went about this situation, this is what they have officially said. This was a deal that they could not pass up. That is the Browns' statement on this trade. It was such a good deal that they couldn't pass up. Now, I look at that and look at this deal, and I don't see it. Me personally, I don't look at what they got in return and go, oh my God, they couldn't pass that up. But maybe my opinion's too low on Jared Verse. If your opinion is really, really high on Jared Verse, if you think Jared Verse can be a top 5 edge rusher, somebody who could get into the all-pro conversation, one of the 4 best edge rushers in all of football, okay. Maybe that price makes sense. Then that's something you have to consider. We'll ultimately see how that pans out, because part of the evaluation of this is going to be an evaluation of Andrew Berry's ability to recognize the potential in pro personnel, which is his specialty, right? He's a pro personnel guy, came from a pro personnel department before he was a general manager. So that's the justification for the trade right out the horse's mouth. We're going to cover more of this press conference in just a second, but let me thank my sponsor, PrizePicks. PrizePicks is a fun way to earn cash while you watch your favorite teams. No complex betting rules, just pick more or less on a few player stats and lock in your lineup. Here are my picks for this upcoming season, AFC North edition. Jimmy Bernard, I have less than 475. This has to do with volume available in Pittsburgh's offense. Quincy Judkins, I have over 975. Browns improved line. I think the run game's going to be better with it. Chase Brown under 900 yards. Joe Burrow equals less rushing yards usually for the Bengals offense. Mark Andrews more than 475 yards. Lamar's going to need a safety blanket. Check to see if PrizePicks is available in your state. You could follow me on the app at Quinn_C to see all my lineups. Download the PrizePicks app today. Play $5 and get $50 in lineup to download the app using the link in the description. All right, let's hear more of Andrew Berry's justification for trading Myles Garrett.
I'd always told myself that if, we were ever in a position where we were going to trade Myles, 3 things would have to be true. Number 1, it would have to have short and long-term benefits. Number 2, as part of the trade, a young, cost-controlled star at a premium position would have to be included. And the third piece is that there would have to be premium draft capital.
Now, to this part, this is, I think, honest from Andrew Berry, at least this part. We had known this formula was out for a Myles trade, right? That you needed a young star, you needed draft assets, and you needed things for the future and the present in the trade.
And there's a very small set of, deals that really satisfy those constraints. So when it got to the point with our negotiations with the Rams, when, all those things were satisfied, it really, caused us to take a step back and think about, really think about the decision. Jared Verse, he's obviously a huge part of this return for us. Jared is an outstanding football player, former Defensive Rookie of the Year, 2-time original ballot Pro Bowler. He's a perfect DNA match for our attacking front. He's really a terror in both phases, both as a run defender and a pass rusher. And we are really, really excited to add him to our team. He allows us to continue to play defense as a high level, which has been our standard over the past several seasons. And we're really excited to welcome him into the organization. So we're excited about this transaction. It wasn't something that we anticipated, certainly coming into this year or coming into the spring, or quite honestly coming out of the draft. But it's a great opportunity for our team, and I know there are a ton of questions, so I'll open it up.
So it is very clear that they see Jared Verse as the centerpiece to this deal. The piece that overwhelmed him, right, when it came to trading him, because the way that Andrew's presenting it is that he can't believe that Jared Verse became available. And once Jared Verse became available and I can get a first-round pick, it was just too much value for me to pass up. That is what he's presenting, and Jared Verse is a gigantic part to that. And we'll see if Jared Verse can live up to that. I think it's kind of a raw deal for Jared, that's where we have to kind of evaluate him, right? I wish we could have landed Jared Verse on this roster in any other way so we didn't have to evaluate him like that, right? Because as much as it's going to be annoying hearing, well, he's not Myles every time Jared Verse does something, the Browns kind of set it up to where that's what people have to do when they watch him, because, again, they're making it clear. They traded Myles Garrett, not because they had to trade Myles Garrett, but because Jared Verse being involved in a deal for Myles Garrett made that deal so good they couldn't refuse it. This is exactly what they're saying. I'm not really paraphrasing anything, but let's continue.
I guess why now? And do you regret not having made this when Myles asked to be traded after 2024?
Yeah, no regret, Scott. And in terms of the why now is just honestly the opportunity was too great. It wasn't like a plan A going into the offseason. Quite honestly, we would have operated differently if it was. But sometimes things come across your path that you're not expecting, and you can't be so dogmatic in your strategy and planning that you can't adjust and be flexible to great opportunities.
Were you able to have conversations with Myles leading up into this moment, like meaningful conversations leading up into this?
You say, and let me just for clarification, Kiam, regarding the trade or just more generally?
Like, I guess.
Yeah, both. Myles. Myles was a good communicator throughout the spring. We obviously talked through the coaching search, free agency, before the draft. He was good in terms of sharing his travel plans in the offseason, things like that. So that was all very, very normal as he's been accustomed to later in his career. We did not blindside Myles with the news yesterday. Obviously, was a well-tenured member of the organization, someone that we expect to retire Brown. So he was made aware about a week ago that it was a possibility, and that's a courtesy that that obviously we owe him. So the communication was good with him.
So you did not consider Myles's absence, travel plans, ghosting, a protest to get up to leave the team?
Yeah, he didn't ghost, and Tony, no, not at all. I mean, Myles's off-season ritual is pretty consistent the past couple years, and Myles was good in terms of communicating with us throughout the spring. So no, I know there's been a lot of conspiracy theories with that type of narrative, but that had zero impact on the trade.
Going back.
So again, just to make it clear, right? Because if this trade goes wrong, people will then try to paint it, if they want to defend Andrew Berry's decision to do this, as something he had to do. He had no choice. He is making it very clear here that they chose to trade Myles Garrett. Not Myles Garrett chose to trade them, right? Now, could Myles's unhappiness with the team overall have factored into the decision? Yeah. If you're Andrew Berry, you're thinking to yourself, maybe maybe we can keep Myles around because he has a contract here for 2-3 more years, but Jared Verse will be much more seamless and we could just bring him in. Like, that could be a factor, but he's making it clear they did not have to trade Myles Garrett this year. Like, I know that that's what everybody is saying was going on, but literally Andrew Berry just called that stuff conspiracy theory. Like, straight out the horse's mouth. And that's what I'm going to judge him by, right? If this comes down in a few years and it doesn't look great, I'm not going to be like with the Deshaun trade where it's like, oh, he had nothing to do with it. No, he decided to do this. He wanted to do this. He said he wanted to do this. This is what we have on record, right? And that's going to be 100% fair in my opinion. It just is what it is. Now, and if it works out the other way, he gets a bunch of credit because he didn't have to do it. He made a choice that was not an easy choice to make and a popular choice to make, and it ended up working out. But we got to stop acting like this happened because the Browns were forced to make it happen. They are telling you clearly they were not forced to make it happen, that they made this decision because this is what they wanted to do.
The contract restructuring, whatever you want to call it, in the offseason. When you did that, did you, you've talked about flexibility, but did you ever think at that point that you were going to, when you got past June 1st, that this was a distinct possibility? Or
no, I mean, like I'd like to sit here and say it was some grand master plan, but it really wasn't. What it did do is honestly probably because of a lot that was reported. That is what originally caused LA to to reach out and check in, and we said, hey, look, he wasn't available. To their credit, they were really, really persistent, and then really things kind of picked up after the draft.
Are you able to like explain, maybe provide further clarity on why the date was moved back? Because I mean, it ultimately benefited you in terms of salary cap.
Yeah, I don't talk about our contract management strategies, as you know, Daniel. I understand the curiosity with it. It's one of those situations where probably the truth is a lot more boring than you all think, but I'm not going to comment on our strategy. Yeah.
In terms of fans and people think.
Well, that, my friends, and Daniel, if you're watching, big shout out to Daniel, friend of the show. That is a yes, okay? That is a big fat, he can't say yes, but he just said yes to that answer, right? I thought the June 1st stuff that people were making a big deal out of, I didn't really think it was much. Obviously, I was wrong there, but he just gave you the answer. Yeah, that's exactly what they were doing. Which kind of throws his narrative into question, right? Because again, if he's saying, oh yeah, well, we were surprised to make this deal up until the draft, we didn't think this would happen. But then also the whole June 1st thing kind of flies in the face of that narrative here. I don't know what happened, right? There's a lot of different paths you can go on for what you believe for why this trade happened. Was it Miles forcing this issue? Was it the Browns just deciding to make this happen? I don't know, because if this was Miles forcing a trade, why wouldn't they just say that? Like there's no reason to protect Myles Garrett here if you're Cleveland, right? Like, what's the benefit? So if Miles was forcing you to do this, why not say, hey, look, sometimes with players, you get into a situation, we didn't want anybody to be unhappy here, but we did the best we could do, and we're really thrilled with what we got. You can say that. I've heard them say that before, right? You can acknowledge that there was some unhappiness there. And maybe they were afraid to do that for whatever reason. But again, I got to judge you based on what you say. And when it comes to this trade, what Andrew Berry said about this trade is very simple. They did this because of the value that they saw in Jared Verse. And look, we can't make judgments on this trade definitively until we see how it plays out. But 2-3 years down the line, if it doesn't work out, I don't want to hear the shield of, oh, well, Andrew was forced to do that. No. He clearly said that that's not what happened. That's what it is. That's where we are with Andrew Berry in this trade. Honestly, I think the truth is very complicated. I think there were points where the Browns really thought they were close to making a trade with the Rams. Maybe at the beginning of the offseason, they thought that was going to happen. And then things went cold with the Rams. The Rams make a couple of decisions. And then after the draft, next thing you know, things are back on, right? I think this was much more on and off than Andrew Berry is giving it credit for being. And I think it was much more on and off than maybe the internet is giving it credit for being. I think at one point they really thought they were going to trade Miles to the Rams because there was a lot of smoke of doing it around the start of the new league year. And then things cooled off around the draft. And then things picked up a few weeks after the draft when they were hearing all the rumors about the Browns and the OTAs and all that shit. And LA reached out and asked about Myles Garrett. So, and then things got back on. I think it's really that simple. I think Miles' agent probably had something to do with this, right? Because if you're Miles' agent and you know that Miles has an interest in playing for a contender and you hear that the Rams are poking around, you're going to be involved in that situation, right? Obviously Miles is okay with being traded. I don't think we've grabbed Miles out of Cleveland and forced him out of here. But I do think that if Miles wasn't traded, he would have played here this year. So again, I don't think that the Browns had to trade Myles Garrett. I think they looked at the options on the board, they looked at the landscape that they were looking at, and they decided that this was the best way to go forward. And we'll see if they're right on that. But this is the decision that they made of their own free will.
That this move means you guys are tanking. What can you tell the fans about that? And then also, like a corollary to that would be, does this mean that Denzel could possibly be on the trading block now, or can you address that?
I guess I'd say two things. I'd say number one, all of our goals are still in front of us. We have an excellent defense with really good players at on three levels, and Jared, he's an outstanding. He's one of the best players in the league, and so we're excited to have him as a part of our team. To the second part of your question, I guess I'd maybe clarify your line of question, Mary Kay, in the sense that Miles wasn't on the trading block. We weren't auctioning him off. This is not something that was a primary consideration going into the spring.
Andrew, had Miles indicated to you that he's open to being traded still?
No, there was no trade request or anything like that. Dan. Obviously, you talked through it a little bit earlier because he did have the no trade clause, and obviously he was pleased with LA, but that wasn't the primary consideration.
He wasn't.
Again, last time, I'm not going to say it again, but that's what he says. You can believe it, you can not. But as far as what I'm going to judge the trade off of, I got to take his word for it, right? For better or worse.
We're auctioning him off. If there have been reports that this was the only team that you seriously engaged in talks, why not open up the bidding and try to get a few more picks out of it?
That wasn't the goal. That wasn't the goal of Miles. And probably what I mentioned on the onset, if we were to trade Miles, it's a very narrow universe of deals that satisfy it. Everyone wants to have a Miles Garrett on their team, but not everyone can afford that acquisition cost in terms of players, picks and dollars. And so, that was not the intent of any of it.
I wonder how that affected the Browns' leverage, right? Is that in order to trade for Miles Garrett, you had to satisfy a lot of different things. You had to satisfy things for Miles Garrett. You had to satisfy things for Andrew Berry, right? So that by nature is going to filter out a lot of different teams, which means there's less leverage in the market to make it happen. Now, obviously, the leverage that the Cleveland Browns had, which now, to be fair to the Browns, the leverage that the Browns had was that they did not have to trade Miles Garrett, right? This does not work, and this cannot happen if the Browns are seen as a team that has to trade Miles Garrett, right? And it's probably why they didn't make the trade last year, as much as people are doing hindsight 2020 on why they didn't make the trade last year. Last year, the perception was the Browns have to trade Miles Garrett. So when that's the perception, your leverage isn't as strong. This year, the perception was the Browns don't have to do it. You have to make a move for them that does lead to stronger leverage for Cleveland. And if Cleveland would have let this play out, maybe Miles doesn't get vocal about it this year. He plays through 2026. But by the time you get to 2027, 2028, it might be a situation where Miles is threatening to sit out, is threatening to retire. And it's a unconscionable situation between the team, ownership, and management and Miles Garrett. And that puts you in a situation where you have to trade Miles, which means your leverage is much weaker. So that very well might have factored into why the Browns chose to make this trade at this time. I think it's reasonable to think that.
Andrew, you can
Let me go here first, and I'll come back to Tony.
To go back to Mary Kay's question about Denzel, maybe some of the other veterans. I mean, there's been so much change, obviously, for them these last few months. Now with Miles gone too, do you plan on having any conversations with them, or do you feel like they know, hey, our goals are the same? Do you feel that there's that sentiment there after a move like this?
Actually, change is commonplace in the NFL, and roster turnover is commonplace in the NFL. We have good communication with all of our players. We obviously, for a move of this magnitude, we communicate directly with them, so they hear it from us and they understand everything that's involved. But we have a good group of guys in that locker room, and we're really excited about the core. Go ahead, Tony.
Some might argue that you received more for Travis Hunter than you did for Miles Garrett. Even if you don't acknowledge that, do you think Miles' age was the one factor that you couldn't get more?
Oh, I tell you what, we're very pleased with the return we got, Tony. I mean, I think for us, getting a player of Jared's caliber, plus the pick considerations, was excellent. It's something that we certainly didn't expect coming into the spring.
What did
Let me go, Zach, and then I'll go to you, Daryl.
when teams called in February 25? What did you tell teams then?
No. No. Do you have a follow-up?
You just weren't doing it.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, we're not interested in trading Miles.
Look at where the Rams are in their, I guess, expectations, if you will. A lot of people, say those picks aren't as good because they're likely going to be in the back end of the rounds, and therefore it wasn't enough. Even with, Jared, just what would you say to that? The first, the second, and the third likely could very well end up in the back end of those rounds.
Yeah, I think that I'd say a couple things to that, Daryl. I'd say number one, the combination of picks and players is we think is excellent. We're really pleased with it, short and long term. I'd say the second piece of that in terms of us today on June 2nd, assuming where we know those picks, we all probably have to have a little bit of humility because we just don't know how the season's going to unfold. And probably the third part is, realistically, any team that is making a move for a player of Miles's caliber, they feel like they're in their window, or they are in their window. There's unlikely to be a deal out there where you're getting a expected top 5 pick out of it. Which is why the volume of picks and particularly the inclusion of Jared was incredibly important.
You said that you didn't have this on your bingo card, so I'm just wondering, is there a moment you can pinpoint where it went from being, this is never going to happen, to, this is seeming like it is?
The inclusion of Jared in the deal. Yeah. Let me go, Fred, and then I'll come back to you, Tony.
This is a big double down. This whole press conference is a gigantic double down on Jared Verse. This is Andrew Berry sticking his chest out and saying, Jared Verse, first round pick, and more draft compensation while having Jared Verse in, that is enough to justify the trade for Myles Garrett. We'll see, man. Andrew Berry clearly has a high opinion of Jared Verse, right? Higher opinion than I have of Jared Verse. And we'll see if he's right. I mean, look, Andrew's been right about things before. So I'll give him that grace. I'm not happy with the trade, but I'll at least see it out. You know what I mean? I'll at least evaluate it down the line and look at it. But this whole press conference is basically Andrew saying, we did this because they included Jared Verse. And he's low-key kind of like talking to the media and saying, hey, man, y'all don't know how good Jared Verse is. That's his argument. This all makes sense to Andrew Berry when you factor in how well he thinks of Jared Verse. I imagine Jared Verse would be somebody they would deem a orange dot guy, right? Like Spencer Fano. Which, again, we got to the draft and we realized, people didn't know what the Browns were going to specifically do in the draft because we didn't factor in how much they like Spencer Fano, right? They clearly value Jared Verse at a high level. They don't see him as a throw-in. They see him as the centerpiece, and they see him as a young star. This is exactly out the words that Andrew Berry said here. They really believe in Jared Verse. It's going to be interesting. Jared Verse is a guy who I would think welcomes pressure, and he got thrown into a pressure cooker here because the GM, after trading one of the greatest defensive players of all time, the greatest edge rusher in my lifetime, is standing 10 toes down at the press conference after he traded him and saying, no, this guy plus picks is going to be worth it. In Andrew Berry's mind, he didn't trade Myles Garrett. He traded for Jared Verse and got picks back too. Think of it like a trade back. That's kind of how in my mind I think of it, right? We talked about the trade back last year, right? Well, 2 years ago in 2025, where they went back and instead of taking Travis Hunter, they went and took Mason Graham and for moving back, They got an extra first, which turned into Casey Concepcion. And they got an extra second that turned into Quinshawn Junkins. Imagine this was a draft board, right? It's not, but let's imagine it was a draft board. And Andrew has the number 1 pick. And Myles Garrett is there. Andrew Berry is basically saying, hey, we're going to trade back from Myles Garrett to Jarrett Verse, and we're going to pick up picks, and we think we're going to end up out that deal better. That is the thought process for Andrew Berry here. It is undeniable, after listening to his own words, that that is the thought process and the framework that is fair to judge this trade off of as we get deep into the future, right? We're not going to evaluate this trade, 2 weeks in. We're going to evaluate this trade a year in, 2 years in, 3 years in, right? That is the value proposition he made. Now, obviously, age factors in there. Myles is older than Jarrett. I've talked enough about that. But that's really what is justifying the trade. Like, if you're a Browns fan like me and you're wondering, why did they do this? The answer is Jarrett Verse. Now, that might not be an answer that you understand today, but Andrew Berry is making the argument, and this is what he's saying, not what I'm saying. This is clearly what he's saying. He's making the argument that eventually you guys will understand why that was enough. We'll see if he's right about that, but that's my thoughts about Andrew Berry's press conference. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.